Kia ora tātou, talofa lava, warm Pacific greetings, assalam and welcome. Welcome to this first session on day 2 of this fabulous long-term conditions hui. Ko Andy Shirtcliffe toko ingoa no Manatu Haora aho. Just following on the inclusivity theme, I just want to show off with my t-shirt today. This is the Pacific Pharmacist Association, which is a new organisation in pharmacy, and I feel very honoured there are only a handful of these t-shirts. I'm clearly not of Pacific origin, but in the interest of inclusivity, the association allows me the honour of wearing it, so thank you. It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce 2 of my colleagues and pharmacist colleagues and peers who have fabulous journeys and stories to share about taking the specific pharmacist medicines expertise out into communities and out into teams to help people who are living with long-term conditions get the best out of their medicines. And my 2 colleagues this morning are 2 examples of some of the fabulous work that's going on in pockets around the country. Certainly 2 examples of centres of excellence. First up this morning is Helen Cant. Helen is a pharmacist prescriber working in primary care in the 2 general practices in Tokoroa. Helen has over 30 years' experience as a pharmacist, working in community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, managerial roles. Her current role involves working with people to optimise their medicines regimens and provide health information for people living with long-term conditions. Helen has had a long-standing interest in education and health literacy, with a particular focus on communicating with people about medicines and how to get the best from their medicines in a way that people really understand. Now, 2019 was a really special year for Helen. She was awarded the Pharmaceutical Society Pharmacists of the Year award. She also won the Innovation in Pharmacy Award at the National Awards for her project using continuous blood glucose meters as education tools to enable people with type 2 diabetes to understand what it actually is that impacts on their blood glucose. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Helen to the stage.
This is a story about being part of managing type 2 diabetes in primary care in a small rural Waikato town. A little bit, and I won't go through all the stuff in the slides. The slides are here, they're complete. Hopefully they hang together as a story. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. If you want to have more information, the slides will be there, and I'm more than happy to discuss. So suffice to say, how did I get to here? Well, it was a lot of time and weekends and evening work, but I'm delighted to be a pharmacist prescriber. I hope you all know all about pharmacist prescribers. In case you don't, I'm happy to talk about that too, one-on-one later on. Tokoroa. So Tokoroa is clearly the centre of the country. It's a small town it's actually the biggest town in the South Waikato district. It's got 14,000 people in Tokoroa. The district is about 17,000-ish, 22,000 in the wider area, of which 35% are Maori and 20% are for the Pacific Islands, so mostly from the Cook Islands. We win awards. We have fantastic rugby league players and netball players, and as well as that we win awards for high deprivation, low health literacy, difficulty of access to health care, poor housing, and we've now got people moving out of Auckland because of the housing crisis in Auckland and ending up living in the caravan park in Tokoroa. So, healthcare in Tokoroa. We're co-located with the hospital, so this was a change about 6 years ago. Now, the Tokoroa Hospital had been steadily downsized over the years, and they had 2 mothballed wards which were reconfigured as 2 general practices. Well, there was a few mergers in general practice. We've ended up with secondary care at one end, and primary care with the 2 medical practices and one of the town pharmacies at the other. So what happened in Tokoroa? Now, this is not intended to be a criticism of any body, any system or anything. This is a story of what happened. I went to the people I've been privileged to walk alongside in their health journey and said to them, so I've been asked to talk at this forum and what shall I say? They said, Helen, just go and tell our story. And so I'm privileged to do that today. So I don't have to tell you that. In Tokoroa, there was, about 6 years ago, there was a bit of a perfect storm. So secondary care was saying, we're overcommitted with type 1 diabetes, type 2 really needs to be managed in primary care. They were organising education things for GPs, there's all sorts of things going on. But unfortunately, in primary care, there had been very long-standing GPs who'd been in town for a very long time, but they were all well at or beyond retirement age, and they couldn't carry on. So all but one retired or moved out of town all at once, pretty much. And there was extreme difficulty recruiting. We have very caring, very hard-working healthcare teams working under extreme pressure who get very bad press from time to time. And I did a little bit of arithmetic yesterday. Somebody asked me a question. And in 2 practices, we've had, as well as doctors from New Zealand, in the last 6 years, we've had doctors and locums from at least 16 countries around the world. So it's been very inconsistent from the point of view of care, and people who are used to regular GPs really struggle with seeing somebody different every time. We have about 1,500 people that we know of with diabetes. I'm sure there's a whole lot more. And so I got involved. So why the pharmacist? Can't the GP or the nurse do that? Well, I've just given you the picture. The GPs were few and far between. The acute demand was overwhelming. The nurses were trying to back up the GPs. And actually pharmacists add a different point of view. And when I first started in Tokoroa, the practices looked at me and went, so we've got a pharmacist. What are we going to do with one of them? Why are you here? But I think after just quite a fairly short period of time, they were all going, oh, actually, this person adds a whole different perspective onto primary care. And I guess we're specialised in medication management. And for the people who come to see me, they don't just get talking about diabetes or COPD or whatever they've come to talk about. They get a full medication review. And sometimes that's just a scan down the medication list and go, I can see there are a few problems here, perhaps we should explore the whole thing. But in this case, insulin is clearly a medicine. I'm clearly a pharmacist. I already have long appointments for medication review. I don't cost for patients. And I had interest and I had adult teaching skills as well. But it was a steep learning curve. Now, I don't need to tell you any of this either, but I want you to remember from this slide that the equivalent of an 11-unit decrease in HbA1c leads to a substantial decrease in the risk of diabetes-related comorbidities. And, for example, reduced kidney function. So this comes from that study at the bottom there. You all know the story about diabetes and dialysis. And optimising treatments to prevent development is really, really important. But you'll also know, I hope, that we don't have access to either of those 2 classes that you're talking about in New Zealand at this point in time. Although there is a consultation document out there, I believe, or even perhaps a request for proposals. So type 2 diabetes is a metabolic disease. It's got multiple hormone imbalances. It's not just about people who've done this to themselves. And you get this spiral going on where you have insulin resistance, high insulin levels, you have high carbohydrate intake, high blood glucose levels, high blood glucose, high insulin, high triglycerides, fatty liver, high insulin levels, fat burning is turned off, so people are being told to lose weight, but actually the insulin is causing them to put on weight, and so it goes on. So what are the barriers? It's a complex problem. There's a whole lot of issues going on. Carbohydrates are cheap, veggies are not. Sugar is everywhere and it's addictive. Work commitments, money, family, beliefs. I don't feel sick, so I'm not sick, is one that springs to mind. depression, anxiety, family. Who does the cooking? Do you have any control of what you're eating at all? Dental problems? And is blood glucose testing even possible? So what are people told? Your BMI, your blood glucose and your cholesterol are really high. You need to lose weight, eat a healthy diet, take your medication, do more exercise, test your blood glucose regularly and keep your blood glucose in control. Yep, absolutely. But what do they hear? They feel judged. And many, many people are totally frustrated, desperately frustrated by their inability to get on top of their diabetes. And again, doctor, you want me to lose weight, but the medicines you are making me put on weight. So yeah, I know insulin works, but actually it makes people put on weight, and so does gliclazide, which is the other mainstay of primary care type 2 diabetes. So where I came in from this was, when I started in this journey, was, do these people actually have appropriate information? They might have had diabetes for 20 years, but they've said to me consistently, I really don't understand what all these numbers mean. Do they understand what it is? Do they know the physiology? Do they know what their targets are? How are we actually talking to them? Empower the person. And this is something that was a real focus out of the Pharmacist prescriber course, I must say, is around patient consultation skills and approaching people in a way that is actually supportive in their healthcare journey. Hopefully the technology is not going to fail me now, because this is what people with diabetes face doing.
Test strips, finger pricker or lancing device, a lancet, cotton wool, and a monitoring diary to record the results. Step 1, wash your hands first. Make sure your hands are thoroughly dry before starting the test. Load a new lancet into the finger pricker or lancing device. Snaps in there. Load a test strip. Into the blood glucose meter. This one switches on as you put the test strip in. Prick your finger at the sides as it's less painful than at the tip or at the pad, so prick it on the sides just here. Give a little squeeze. Not too hard. If you need to squeeze too hard, then take another test and prick your finger again. Just check the machine is on before you put the blood onto the strip. The result should appear within a few seconds. There we go, it's a little bit low, 3.6, so I'll need to treat that with some glucose tablets. Just clean your finger, clean the blood off the fingers, remove the test strip, which can be thrown away, and make sure that the lancet in the machine is disposed of in a sharps bin. Finally, record your results in a blood glucose monitoring diary, as I have here.
Okay.
3.6.
That young man clearly has perfect eyesight. He can see the little book, and I think he has type 1 diabetes. So the first problem in New Zealand is actually the lancets, the one that you change all the time in the finger prick, aren't subsidised on prescription. So people have to go and buy them. So they reuse them, and that makes it hurt more. They can't see well enough. They haven't got the dexterity. They haven't got the circulation often, and they've got peripheral neuropathy, or they work in the bush. How do you wash your hands if you work in the bush? They don't like doing it at work. And the final one that people say, the reading's always high, I just feel like throwing the machine out the window. Don't need that one. This one is about the best information from finger prick tests. Really doesn't give you very good information. And that graph on the left, those lines actually shouldn't be there, because what we've got is a series of snapshots. That's not what blood glucose does. It doesn't go up and down like that. It doesn't give you the full picture. So, barriers, cost. What are we going to do? We've got $50 a week for everything else at the end of paying for our regular bills. You're looking after your 2 grandsons because their mother isn't coping. And what are you going to buy? A cauliflower or 4 loaves of bread? Time? It's not simple. It can't be done in a 15-minute appointment. It needs appropriate up-to-date knowledge, and the international guidelines are changing significantly. So, I do silly stories. And what I think about this is, if you're having your gallbladder out and the surgeon finds some complications, but they've run out of allocated time, they don't sew you up and say, oh, let's make another appointment. There's got to be a better way. There's just got to be a better way. So what I do, education, what is diabetes? And we talk about the physiology in quite some depth, and people are absolutely fascinated. They have no idea of the physiology behind the diabetes. We talk about what are carbs, what are proteins, what are fats. Clearly I'm not a dietitian, but I have gone and done some study to make sure I'm giving appropriate information in this area. Giving not just across the board information, but really specific information, and looking at what they're actually doing and what they can actually achieve. Analogies. So why is your pancreas like your bank account? I'm quite proud of this one. Think of the insulin as the money, the carbohydrates are the bills, and so every time you eat carbohydrates, you need to pay for it by producing insulin. If your pancreas is up and running, sweet, you're like Elton John. He's got, presumably, I don't know, but presumably more money than he actually needs. But if he goes and buys a gold-plated piano every week for 20 years, he's going to run out of money, and that's what happens with your pancreas. If you're eating high carbs, high sugar for 20 years or more, you're going to wear those pancreas cells out. And insulin resistance then, with weight gain, means that you're not shopping at the supermarket anymore, now you're shopping at the dairy, so it all costs more, it all needs more insulin. The other one that people get is that increasing medications without managing carbohydrate is like trying to brake the car with your foot still on the accelerator. And the other thing that I think is really important is to state that type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes are completely different diseases. Communication and trust are absolutely key. Empower the family, empower the person. What's their target? Use the pictures. They get this, they come back and go, am I in the red, am I in the yellow, am I in the green, where am I? They don't necessarily need to know the numbers, they need to know where they are with the colour. Use appropriate resources. One of my very first people that I was working with insulin, I had all my books ready for him and he said, there's no point, I can't read. Bless him, because it sent me on a path to look for appropriate resources. And I do lots of pictures. So he could read numbers, so it's like how much are we actually eating across the day? And he came off his insulin in 6 months, actually. He changed what he was eating. Use pictures. So some of these are from the Australians who use apps. I use the UK stuff. That's a fun way. It came out of the UK last year, looking at how much sugar starches actually get turned into when they're digested. I think I single-handedly reduced the banana intake in the town of Tukarua. And I was really pleased when the Americans and the Europeans brought out their guideline to discover that they actually agreed with what I was doing, so that's really awesome. But when that's not enough, what are their glucose really doing? And the place of new technology. So I'll introduce you to my first case. A 61-year-old New Zealand used to be a man. He had diabetes for a long time. He was on basal bolus, as complicated as it gets, high-dose insulin. He was putting on weight. His HbA1c was all right, but his finger prick tests were not. What in his girth is going on and how do we find out? Now, I know this case really well. I happen to be married to him. And he has consented to me sharing this information, but not in writing. So I met a colleague who has type 1 diabetes, and she showed me, she knows I'm a gadget geek. She said, hey, you're going to like this. And she showed me a new glucose monitoring system, which isn't subsidised, but had just recently been released worldwide. And it is a continuous blood glucose. Well, it's a continuous glucose monitor. It measures interstitial fluid glucose rather than blood. And I thought, that's what we need to have. So I went home and I said, oh, look, I've been shown this really cool bit of kit and I think we need to get one. And much to my surprise, he wasn't that fussed. And I actually shouldn't be part of his care anyway, I'm just saying. So there was a bit of a domestic and... Anyway, to shut me up, I think, he agreed to wear one for a fortnight. So that little sensor lasts 14 days. It fits on your arm. It's got an applicator thing. Bang, it just penetrates the skin. And it measures your glucose every minute. With the reader, or now with an app, you get what your glucose is, whether it's going up, down, and how quickly, and a graph of the last 8 hours of glucose control. So you get a whole lot more information. So, yeah, to read the glucose, you don't have to make a hole in your finger. You pass the phone or the reader within a few centimetres of the sensor on your arm, and it communicates electronically. Now, there will be a slight difference in the reading between the blood glucose and the interstitial fluid because actually they're not quite the same, but from the point of view of using it for patterns, it was ideal. So what happened? What we found was that he was having overnight hypos, quite severe overnight hypos, like 2.5. Nobody knew. He's also got a really strong rise in glucose in the morning. So by the time he tested in the morning, his glucose was back in the normal range, which explained what was actually going on. And I've found a number of people in this sort of situation. So we reduced the basal insulin, it's fine. But then he chose to change his food choices because he could see in real time what foods were affecting his glucose most. He reduced his short-acting insulin as well because he didn't need as much. And over the next 3 months, both insulins were steadily reduced and then stopped. Sadly, well, or happily, depends, Freestyle Libre achieved what 20 years of nagging had not. We got to the end of the fortnight, just by the way, and he said, where's my next sensor? I went, what do you mean, where's your next sensor? You only agreed to wear one. Oh, but I like it. He maintained his HbA1c at around about 53 to 55 on metformin and diet control alone for 18 months without Libre. Unfortunately, he then had a serious infection last year and he's now on low-dose Lantus. So this is the sort of graphs that you get. So this is Alan's from the last few it's just snapshots that I've picked. So you can see from the top one, he had a bit too many carbs for dinner. He wouldn't have had a lot, but he doesn't have much pancreatic reserve left. And it doesn't take much to stick his blood glucose up, but it did cut. He probably had some short-acting insulin for that, I think. The middle one, he clearly was making his pretty standard now, fairly low-carb choices. Not massively no-carb. He's not doing the whole get rid of carbs completely, but he knows what foods are actually going to spike his glucose, and he chooses to eat other foods. And the bottom one, he actually went to a conference last weekend and managed pretty good control in that situation. I thought this might help a lot of people. So I secured some funding, and we had enough for about 25 people. So I'll do a couple of case studies. Now, this lady is a New Zealand Maori lady. She's very busy studying. She's had type 2 diabetes since 2004, and her HbA1c on referral to me was 112. She'd been on mixed insulin since January 2012. She was too busy to come and see the doctor. She hadn't had very many changes of dose at all, and she didn't believe anything could be done to improve her diabetes control. So we did the whole thing. We trialled her with a Libre, and this is what happened. So the top one is the 21st of March. Her glucose is well in the high teens and 20s most of the time. I could see what was happening, so we adjusted the dose and the timing of her insulin more appropriately. And by the 11th of April, That's what happened. She changed what she was eating, and she was able then to take responsibility. We changed the mixed insulin to basal bolus, and she was able to take responsibility for her own dosing. Now, did it last? Well, this is her HbA1c record. She had 2 sensors, so for 4 weeks. You can see the 112, we dropped it down to 71, and it has dropped and maintained at that level. The last test was in January, so it had dropped a little bit, even with what I like to call the Christmas effect. This lady has needle phobia and panic attacks. 1 sensor, sorted, and she's able to manage insulin because she can manage 1 injection a day as long as she doesn't have to do multiple finger prick tests. We've actually got that funded under disability allowance now. This lady is got a whole lot of mental health issues, a very busy life, lots of caring for grandchildren, lots of other health issues, and money is tight. Her HbA1c in 2017 was 131 when she first came to see me. So we did a bit of work with her, with education to start with. But she said things like, I said, well, what shall I say? And she said, tell them nobody knows how hard I've tried to lose weight. People just say to me, you just need to do this. You've done this to yourself. She's not interested. It's just not true. So we got from 131 to 75 with education over a year and a bit. And then we trialled the Libre. So the estimated HbA1c after a month of that was 58. And she was using it to its full capacity. She's entering her glucose and all the rest of it in. I should say probably at this point that I don't have any financial interest in this company. They say things like it put it in control, it empowered her, you get a whole picture, not just the snapshots. It's easy to use. Groups were helpful. We did some of them in groups. Averages are deceptive. There's another gentleman who was having overnight hypos and massive glucoses during the day, so actually his HbA1c was fine. He wasn't feeling very well. And another one, this gentleman is a truck driver. Nobody would ever have known that every night he was having hypos. So what did we do well? I think a lot of things, a lot about empowering the patient, and the one that I liked was that they said we never ever made people feel stupid or useless. What did they think? They thought most people really liked it. I liked the one with the gentleman who brought it back 2 days later and said it's broken. Tell me more about that. Well, it said my glucose went up to 20 after breakfast. Okay, what did you have for breakfast? Wheat Bix. How many Wheat Bix? 6. So what I'd like you to do then is I suggest you go home and for the next week experiment with breakfasts and see what happens. Have 3 Wheat Bix, have some eggs on toast. And he came back a week later and went, I see what you mean. So what did the project achieve? Now remember I said that number that we were remembering, 11 for a significant drop? So that red line is 11. We had 25 people in total, 20 completed the data collection. We had 4 who really didn't, 2 didn't really engage, 2 really weren't appropriate for the trial. That was a learning for me. But of the rest, the red line is the 11. So 12 of our 20 people had a drop of HbA1c of 16 or greater. And I don't know whether you can see the figures, but the greatest drop that we had there was 61. We go back to that. So I've been thinking. My husband says it's a dangerous activity. Usually means work for him. Should we be managing type 2 diabetes like we manage smoking cessation? Should we? Smoking, addictive substance, nicotine, sugar, support for smoking, quit line, coaches, GPs, nurses. We ask about it every time they go to the doctor. We have pharmacists, we have hospitals, we have spirometry, we have inhalers, we have targets. But in diabetes, it's variable and it's time limited. Medication step 1 in smoking cessation, NRT, unlimited amount. In diabetes, limited range of medications. Intensive intervention step 2, we've got varenicline, originally known as Champix. They can have one course annually. If the first course doesn't achieve smoking cessation, they can have another course in a year. We don't have a step 2, but I did the numbers. And actually when Champix was first funded, and I don't know the actual numbers because there may have been rebates and all the rest of it involved, but in any case, from the information I have, the cost of Champix when it was first introduced is not too dissimilar to about 3 or 4 Libre devices. And of course, the cost to patients in quitting smoking, and there's a saving to patients, but in actual fact in type 2 diabetes, eating properly is more expensive. So yes, but those sensors are expensive. Well, it rather depends on your point of view because, you know, intensive dialysis is not exactly cheap. And a lot of people didn't actually need them all the time. They needed an intensive intervention and that was maintained. Some people do need it all the time, to be fair. They just can't manage with the finger pricking. There's 2 parts to the program. I'm not going to underestimate the support and time and education role because that was part. And if we think about it, so if I can delay 3 people going on to dialysis by a year, every year, then I've more than covered my employment costs. And if a Freestyle Libre delays in-centre dialysis by a year for 1 person, the cost save pays for several hundred Libre sensors. So I dreamed a dream. What if entry to swimming pools was free with a green prescription? People with arthritis can do exercise and water. What if we could provide intensive intervention for everybody with likely insulin resistance early before we get to the pre-diabetes, diabetes stage? You actually don't need that many blood tests to be able to do it now. What if we could use the new technology intermittently to support positive lifestyle change and do it early, before their kidneys or their eyes and their nerves are damaged? What if we tax sugar like we tax smokes? Put the money into diabetes care. Now, there's a thought. And what if we upskill the whole health workforce? Can I run medication optimisation clinics for long-term conditions based in the pharmacies? Watch this space. My area of practice is not just type 2 diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, gout, COPD and asthma. Oh, and I'm a pharmacist, so I can do minor ailments too. We've got 18 pharmacist prescribers in general practice in New Zealand and 12 pharmacist prescribers in hospital. So there's not very many of us, but there's some significant barriers to upskilling for the pharmacist workforce, not least of which is that we do not qualify for any funding for ongoing education. There's a few clinical pharmacists based in GP clinics, and those of them who are there, the GP clinics just love them. And community pharmacy. So we've already got a whole lot of different services. So the warfarin, the CPAM service is always in place. We've got blood pressure monitoring. The need in type 2 diabetes is huge. Could more pharmacists be trained and empowered to help? And what about gout? At this point, I'm going to hand over to my colleague. Thank you for your attention.
Kia ora, Helen. So what about gout? Our next speaker this morning is Diana Phone. Diana is an early career pharmacist, and through her work life, she divides her time between the following: Waimaoku Village Pharmacy, clinical lead for the Owning My Gout services in Counties Manukau, the Safety and Practice Community Pharmacy Program in Waitemata DHB. She is a professional practice fellow at the Otago School of Pharmacy, and she's also the vice president and the founding member of the Pacific Pharmacists Association. 2017 was a special year for Diana because Diana also was awarded the Pharmacist of the Year award in that year. So welcome to the stage, Diana.
Bulavinaka, kia ora, good morning. So my name is Diana and my presentation today is about the Owning My Gout service, which has been recently renamed to be called the Community Pharmacy Gout Management Service. So it's a service about patients working with their GPs, nurses and community pharmacists to manage gout in primary care. So as Andy mentioned, I'm an early career pharmacist. I absolutely love my job. I love being at the coalface of the New Zealand healthcare system, doing the things that we pharmacists do. Often we get very little credit for the things we do, but that's okay because we know that we are there making a meaningful difference to the lives of the people we serve. There are a few different roles that I am currently involved in, which I've disclosed on the slides. When I'm not doing anything pharmacy related, my time pretty much revolves around these two monkeys who help keep me grounded and bring meaning and purpose to my life. I'd like to acknowledge the organisers and especially Susan Reid for allowing me to be present here today and to talk about the Owning My Gout service. So I am originally from Fiji, and rugby is a big part of our culture. So this is a banner from a New Zealand-Samoa rugby game about 2 years ago. It says, go Samoa, if in doubt, blame it on gout. So in January 2016, an article was published in the New Zealand Medical Journal posing this question: gout in Aotearoa, New Zealand, are we going to ignore this for another 3 years? The unfortunate answer has been yes. Updated data from the Health Quality and Safety Commission shows that there is increasing prevalence, there's worse treatment, and there are more hospitalizations. So if we look at Counties Manukau DHB, for example, in 2014, there were about 24,000 people with diagnosed gout in the catchment area. In 2016, this had increased to nearly 28,000 people. So hospital records at counties indicate that there are about 360 admissions into Middlemore Hospital ED annually due to gout, which cost the DHB over $1 million. So this is not just a county's problem. It's about 180,000 people across the country struggle with gout. But this is only counting the number of people with diagnosed gout. We know that there is a high proportion of people out in the community with undiagnosed gout, and they are not captured in the statistics. So this prevalence has been projected to increase greatly in the near future. So I guess the question is, are we going to continue to ignore this for another 3 years, 13 years, 30 years? So why do we need to think about gout seriously? Well, chronic gout can have a substantial impact on the individual's ability to work and spend time with their friends and whānau. So the pain of an acute attack is obviously quite excruciating and debilitating. The financial cost of gout is estimated to be at around $18,000 per person. So this figure includes GP costs, specialists, hospitals, pharmaceuticals, labs, as well as loss of well-being costs such as reduced employment, more sick days, reduced productivity. There is also a high prevalence of metabolic syndrome in individuals with gout. So in New Zealand, 40% of people who have gout also have diabetes and or cardiovascular diseases and are more likely to die at a younger age due to cardiovascular or renal complications. Gout is also an equity disease, is more frequent and more severe in Maori and Pacific people, and the New Zealand statistics show that they're often undertreated. The Maori and Pacific people have also been shown to be less likely to take urate-lowering medications. They tend to be dispensed more painkillers with the potential for serious side effects, such as acute kidney injury. Maori and Pacific patients are also 5 times more likely to be admitted into hospital due to gout when compared to the New Zealand, European, Asian population. The good news, in theory, is that gout can be easily managed with the right treatment, given at the right time, that is coupled with good patient education. However, often gout management is focused on controlling the patient's acute symptoms, while their risk of irreversible joint damage and other negative health outcomes continue to grow. So only about 2 in 5 people with gout actually regularly receive urate-lowering medications. So barriers to effective management of gout are multifactorial, such as delaying initiation of urate-lowering medications, suboptimal dosing, suboptimal monitoring, cost, time, transportation, primary care access issues, and an inability to engage with traditional models of care, particularly for Maori and Pacific patients. It's also been highlighted that the model of care for chronic arthritis management in New Zealand, including gout, is fragmented due to the lack of collaboration between the different healthcare providers. The Owning My Gout service aimed to address some of these barriers to make gout management in primary care more collaborative, patient-centered, and accessible for our patients. So 6 general practices and 7 pharmacies in counties Manukau were involved in the pilot program. Since then, we've managed to get board approval to extend the funding to 22 sites now. So there are other DHBs around the country that are currently either looking at or have already adopted the service. So what does the service actually involve? As I mentioned, it's a collaborative model of care in which the patients are working with their GPs, their nurses, and their community pharmacists. The first thing we're looking at doing is optimizing therapy. So patients can be referred into the service either by their GP, their nurse, their pharmacist, or they can self-refer themselves or their friends or whānau. The GP issues a prescription for allopurinol and prophylaxis. They get a lab form to test their EGFR or kidney function test. The kidney function test guides allopurinol dose titration. So the nurses work with the patients to set goals of treatment on a shared care plan. This helps tailor treatment and advice to the patient. The patient visits their pharmacy every month to have their blood urate levels measured using a point-of-care meter. Based on their blood urate levels, the pharmacist titrates their allopurinol dose via a standing order agreement between the GP and the pharmacist. The standing order was developed with input from GPs, pharmacists, rheumatologists, and a patient. So the pharmacy service is a walk-in service. You don't have to make an appointment prior, and there are no extra costs involved to the patient. Optimizing therapy and increasing accessibility is one part of the Owning My Gout service. Effective treatment is also dependent on these patients having a good knowledge and understanding of their gout so that they're able to make the right choices for themselves. So this knowledge is actually built over time and it requires intensive input. And this is where the monthly contact between the pharmacist and the patient comes into real value. So it's been widely shown that well-informed patients are more likely to adhere to taking urate-lowering medications long-term. Many of our gout patients that you see in primary care come with a mental model that they bring with them about their gout and its management. So many of these patients are often described as not making health a priority, not being compliant or not being adherent, not looking after themselves or their condition, or even sometimes are described as being naughty or just hopeless. So many of them think that getting a flare is their fault because of their diet and lifestyle choices. There is obviously shame attached to it and a lack of understanding and acceptance that gout is actually a long-term condition which requires long-term treatment. Maori and Pacific people also have a specific gene variant that reduces the ability to remove uric acid from their body, which is a key factor in developing gout. It causes them to have more severe gout and actually earlier onset of gout, some even in their teenage years. So it is really important to unpack this information they have, correct any misinformation in a respectful way, build on that information, and then to check to see that the information you've given them, they've understood it correctly. So the pharmacies and the nurses in the OMG service help build patients' understanding using the Stop Gout booklet, which is developed by the Ministry of Health and the Health Literacy Framework. So the Stop Gout booklet has clear illustrations that help emphasize key points. For example, if you look at the pie chart on sort of the bottom left corner, it shows that diet and lifestyle only makes about 20% of the causes for gout. 80% is actually genetics. So this helps to explain patients that they could be fit like Sonny Bill Williams, eat very little seafood, not drink any alcohol, but they're still likely to get gout, and that's why they need to take their urate-lowering medications every day. We've been able to get that book translated into Mandarin, Tongan, and Samoan. So the main outcome measure for this service so far has been clinically desired serum urate levels. This graph shows the average serum urate levels for all patients enrolled in the service. So at their start, the average serum urate is around the 0.5 mark, but we've had patients with serum urate around the 0.8, 0.9 millimoles per litre mark. So over the course of the service, we've been able to reduce their serum urate levels gradually to below the 0.36 mark, and the results were statistically significant. A small sample of patients from one practice on the service were also randomly selected to determine the number of acute visits to their GP for gout prior to enrolling into the service and whilst on the service. So the results showed the number of GP visits for acute gout had dropped from an average of 2.9 visits to 1.2 visits. 80% of the patients in the OMG service are actually Maori and Pacific patients. So this shows that this model of care is able to engage with people of ethnicities with the greatest needs and will hopefully help address the disparity gap long term. Gout is also perceived to be a condition that mostly affects older people. However, as I mentioned earlier, Maori and Pacific people tend to get gout at an earlier age and tend to have more severe gout. So approximately 45% of patients in the OMG service are between the age of 19 to 44 years, which again shows effective engagement with a younger population, where we can really walk towards preventing long-term complications. When we initially designed the service model, the left illustration is what we thought our journey would look like. We had a model based on best practice guidelines. We would test it at a few sites, get a proof of concept data, put together a business case, and bam, we'd get an expansion throughout the country. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, as my kids would say it. However, the reality was very different and very much looked like the illustration on the right. So this was actually a good thing, though, because the challenges in itself brought a lot of learnings for us that I'd like to share with you today. The relationship between the pharmacy and the general practice is core to the success of any of such services. So a trusting relationship and open communication supports the health professionals to work in collaboration with one another to look after their patients. Co-location of pharmacies and general practice may contribute to building that relationship, but it's actually not essential. We had a working group of the clinical leads, so myself, a project manager, and an improvement advisor, who were responsible for managing the development, the refinement, and the implementation of the OMG service. Each of the practices and pharmacists would have champions who would drive the delivery of the service. So all of these individuals are really passionate about the service, and they all dedicated a good amount of time and effort to get the work off the ground and helped inspire others to action. The inclusion of a patient voice during the design phase enabled us to have an equity lens over whatever we were doing. Delivery and sustainability of the service requires fair compensation for pharmacists' time, because it does require pharmacists to leave the dispensary and go into a consultation room and spend time with patients. We also needed to make sure that the pharmacists were trained adequately to deliver the different components of the program, such as how to use the point of care meter, how to provide meaningful education to patients, including cultural competency and health literacy. So this led us to developing an e-learning module, which now sits on the PSNZ platform, is available to all pharmacists to ensure consistency as the service expands. This service was also developed using a strong focus on quality improvement, using the IHI model for improvement methodology and the PDSAs. So this helped us break down the different change components into bite-sized pieces so that any issues were dealt with effectively and efficiently. The general practice and pharmacy teams also had the opportunity to get together at learning sessions to reflect, to share information, and to problem solve. The GPs and nurses that we work with are very supportive of the service, and they are able to see firsthand how it benefits their patients and their practice with helping distributing workload and freeing up staff time. So Dr. Fraser from Turiki Healthcare described how the OMG service has been convenient for the doctors and patients, and that the patients are receiving regular monitoring and education as they need. Pharmacists have highlighted seeing patients engage in learning about gout and its management. They also find it rewarding being part of the wider clinical team. But most importantly, this service to us is for the patients. So this patient narrated to us how he was really struggling with gout pain and not being able to put on his work boots or go to work. The nurses explained to him about his gout and some diet and lifestyle changes that he could make. The pharmacist explained to him his test results and that he was about to reach his target. Since he started taking his tablets regularly, he felt great with no pain and he basically just could put his work boots on and go to work. So this shows to us that making the right information available to people in the right way at the right time, not when it's a little bit too late and the damage has been done, is what makes people use that information to persevere and change behaviour. So in summary, the Owning My Gout service is a collaborative model of care in which the patients are working in partnership with their GPs, nurses and community pharmacists to manage gout. So this service is about optimizing therapy, it's about increasing accessibility and providing education and support to patients so that they can self-manage their gout. So any new service like these needs to be flexible and it needs resourcing in terms of time and money and the right individuals to drive the process forward, especially when the going gets tough. The most important or significant gain for us has been the feedback that we've received from patients and the difference it makes to them. Because what is the most important thing in the world? He tangata, it is the people.
So if my watch is right, we've got about 6 minutes for questions, and Megan over here has the roving mic. If I could ask you to use the mic so that other people in the room can hear what was asked, I'd appreciate that. So any questions? Well, I've got one that we can start with, of course. Oh, sorry, over here.
I'm Gail, I'm from Comprehensive Care in Waitemata DHB area. Helen and Diana, I've thoroughly enjoyed both your presentations, they're fantastic. Helen, totally agree with you. I think it was, you've been really insightful and a good driver for change. I do agree with the sugar tax, but I think that we'd get better bang for the buck if we also made it that you could only, where you've got single-serve places like McDonald's, like the movies, like, wherever you get a drink, that it was actually portion size. At Wendy's, they serve a litre as a drink for Coke. That's never a portion. So actually, it's more than just sugar tax. It's educating, because nobody wants to get overweight. Not one person has said, yippee, I want diabetes. So, just saying, but fabulous.
I absolutely agree. I was being a little provocative. It's election year. And yeah, absolutely portion size is critical, but also driving change through the underlying structure of, Coke costs the same as water.
Kia ora, ko Joseph Jones aho. I'm Medical Director at Pinnacle and a GP. Thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of your presentation, Megan. I was on a coronavirus emergency planning talk with our PHO. I am currently dealing with a workforce crisis in general practice, which I think we are all experiencing across the country. I have 5 practices who I know are on a knife edge with their staffing. I have one practice who has, in response to that, appointed a clinical pharmacist from the UK who's been there prescribing and is in the process of applying for prescribing rights here in New Zealand. I think that this workforce is key for us as we move forward into a situation where I at 57 am slightly older than the average GP in New Zealand. Ahead behind me, at age 45 and less, are 50% fewer GPs in our system than I have looking forward. 50% fewer GPs in our system behind me than I see looking forward. My question is, what else do you need as a professional group? What support do you need from the ministry and from DHBs to expand the role of clinical pharmacists? And my question for the ministry is what's being done to address this crisis with an expansion of roles like this within primary care?
You can have first part of the chair.
How long have you got? I think the pharmacist prescriber role is a fairly new one in New Zealand. And if we're looking at the overseas experience, there was a sort of an initial adoption by a fairly small group of pharmacists at top of scope, shall we say, followed by a teetering point, followed by a wider adoption. I think the one of the key things is to make sure that the pharmacists who want to go down that path are well and appropriately trained. I know that the pharmacist prescriber course, without doubt, was the most difficult course I've ever done in my whole life. But I learned a whole lot, and we learned stuff around patient consult skills, typically. It's not an easy thing because the way that the pharmacist, and I can't speak for community pharmacy or for the DHBs or funders or anybody else, but from a pharmacist looking in with experience in that area. While you have pharmacists stuck in dispensaries desperately trying to put through 700 prescriptions a day, and they're not going to get out and start providing clinical services, even if they wanted to, which some of them do and some of them don't. And that's fine. We need a structure of education such that pharmacists have got access to high quality continuing education with some support and funding. Now, I've been quite lucky in where I've been working. I did most of my postgraduate work in hospitals where there is funding, but for community pharmacists, unless your employer wants to fund your courses, you're facing, to get to a clinical diploma, you're probably facing $15,000 to $20,000 worth of costs. If you happen to be a young pharmacist working in Auckland getting paid $25 an hour, that's unachievable. From the point of view of actually being a prescriber, and I should say that I know both of the universities are looking at restructuring their courses for prescribers to see if they can make it more modular, or certainly Otago is looking to see if they can make it more modular, and that is creating a great deal of debate in the profession. From the point of view of barriers for me as a prescriber, well, I can't prescribe controlled drugs. I don't really want to prescribe morphine, but some of my colleagues want to work in hospice. And, registered nurse prescribers. So I sent poor Andy an irritated email earlier in the year, didn't I? Saying that actually now I can mentor my practice nurse colleagues through their new prescribing papers. At the end of it, I can go and ask them to can you please prescribe some Panadine for this patient, because I actually can't, because I can't prescribe codeine at all. That is stuck in a sort of a bureaucratic place where we didn't get added to the changes to the misuse of drugs legislation at a time when we could have done alongside the nurse, and it didn't happen. I don't actually understand the timelines behind that, but now we're all busy dealing with medicinal cannabis and coronavirus and all the rest of it, and I don't think that 30 pharmacist prescribers are high on the agenda. I don't know what the answer is. I'm sorry about the long answer.
I'd like to see more change from the bottom-up approach. So actually building relationships between GPs and community pharmacies in your workplace. So I'm not a pharmacist prescriber, but I've got a post. Okay, yet. But I've got, postgraduate qualifications. I work in a community pharmacy that's co-attached to a general practice. The general practice is very welcoming of all the pharmacy services that we provide. They give us a lot of autonomy. There's a very good trusting relationship. We've got a GP computer installed in the pharmacy. So every time I have a query about a prescription, I don't have to call the prescriber. I don't have to walk into the prescriber's office. I can log into the notes and have a look. It makes a lot of sense as to, actually the dose is meant to go up, or no, this is an error. The GP practice over there allows me to do medicines reconciliation, look at their discharge summaries, update their medicines list so that the next prescription that the GP writes is actually correct, in line with what the hospital changes was done. So little things like this is empowering your local pharmacists and building relationships with them. Works both ways, obviously, and building the relationship takes time and effort. But if we did bottom-up approach as well, I think that would be really valuable.
Thank you for that challenge. And from the ministry?
Yeah, so I'm going to, I've got 3 very brief things. I know we're at time, so allow me to be brief and succinct, but don't read this as flippant and fob off. I think my colleagues have both demonstrated from a top-down and a bottom-up that they understand how the system works and how relationships works, and that there are challenges and opportunities for us across that spectrum. All conversations about all of those elements from a top-down are occurring. I'd like them to be happening faster. Some of them are caught up in legislative processes. Some of them are caught up in things like the health system review, and the health and disability system review has had input from us on exactly these areas. In the shorter term, there are examples around the country of teams under the current frameworks that are able to support bringing pharmacists into their teams and bringing physiotherapists and psychologists. They are funded through a mixture of routes through the PHO agreement, directly from DHBs, and a mixture. So I think we are continuing to work from a top down, and I hear the challenge, and I will keep working hard in all of those areas. But to pick up on Diana's point, I think we can go from the top down and the bottom up, and hopefully we can meet in the middle soon. Thank you. Who am I handing up? Well, if you could join me in thanking Diana and Helen.